want to give you a heads-up warning about today's podcast. It is a conversation with a sex coach, not a therapist, so it's not therapy. But in talking about sex, we are explicit. And so be forewarned. If you have children around, might want to turn this off. It does contain explicit references to sex, although it's later in the conversation. Thanks so much.
Even in my own personal life, it was so much easier to find really strong, empowered, secure women than it was men. I felt like this just isn't right.
What is the sound of one man listening? This is ManListening, a fresh podcast featuring the stories of strong women who bounce back. ManListening, because every woman deserves to be heard.
My name's Stuart Watson, and this is ManListening, and I am poolside behind a home in a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, with Sarrah. Where were you born?
I was born here.
In Phoenix?
In Maricopa County. Probably about 10, 15 minutes from here. So I have a great family. I'm close with all my family, and about 95% of them live in this area. Both my parents are evangelical ministers, and so I was raised in that world, very sheltered, very, very religious. The church had a school, and so I went to the school that was there at the church. And so that was my entire life. You know, this is pre-internet days. It wasn't like kids nowadays are online all the time and, you know, exploring whatever they want to explore. At that time, if your parents wanted you to have, you know, one view of the world, it was very easy to control that. And yeah, so I moved to New York City when I was 17. I graduated high school, and I said, I'm going to go model. And I left, and I moved to New York. And
Did you live by yourself, or?
So I had a friend who I moved in first with her and her boyfriend, just temporarily. And then I bounced around a lot. It was literally like, where am I going to sleep tonight? So model housing and sublets and, you know, illegal sublets. There were a couple nights where I didn't have, I had some money, but like not enough that I wanted to spend it all. And I ended up in Queens at a by the hour place because it was cheaper to, you know, only have to have the room for the amount of hours that I was sleeping.
So you just crashed for that time,
and then, you know, was out during the day and then went back and slept at night.
That is wild.
Yeah.
Did you get work?
I did, yeah. I ended up getting work, but I really didn't like the modeling industry. I don't know what it's like now, but at that time it really was like, you know, drugs and cigarettes and diet pills and just starving yourself. And I was just like a kid in a candy store, and like here I am in New York City, and there's so much fun to be had and all this amazing food to eat, and I'm like, I don't want to starve myself and be miserable. And so I ended up going to school at the Fashion Institute of Technology, and got a job at Bergdorf Goodman.
Oh,
and
that's a good deal.
Yeah, I loved being at Bergdorf. So
that's a great thing. What did your parents say about all this?
It was a challenge for them, for sure. My parents have always been they've always loved me, regardless of what choices I make.
Like they didn't disown you?
They did not disown me, no. But it was a challenge. But I mean, they would come to New York and visit, and they had fun, and you know, they adjusted to it.
Did they say, Sarah, you're making a huge mistake?
They were definitely upset because I had a full scholarship to all the universities in Arizona, and I didn't take advantage of that, you know. And so they were
scholarship for athletics or academics.
Academics,
really?
Yeah. And so like I could have gone to ASU, U of A, or NAU for free, and I left it all, you know, and just was like, I'm going to New York. So there was a big modeling and acting convention in New York, and I had gone to that, and I got an agent. So I did have an agent that I was like going to work with. So I didn't show up, without an agent or anything, but yeah.
Now, your parents not only have this very particular, specific faith, they're preachers, they're ministers in that faith. What was the evolution of your faith, your understanding?
I feel like I had more questioning as a smaller child, and then the indoctrination really set in. And I drank the Kool-Aid, and I remember being so small. I was probably like 2 years old, and we lived on a farm, and it was my grandmother's farm. She had the farmhouse, and we were living in a trailer on the farm. And this was before my brother was born, and I was 3 when he was born, so I was probably 2 or 3. And I remember standing by the refrigerator, and my dad is praying over me, rebuking the spirit of rebellion. Of course, at that age, I didn't know what the spirit of rebellion was, but it sounded terrifying. But from my parents' perspective, I've always been rebellious of the, kind of that indoctrination that they were trying to do. Even though it did work for a while, it never felt right to me. It always felt against my body, my sense of being. Even I'm a vegetarian, and we had cows on the farm that were sent for slaughter, and I remember becoming violently ill at times when I was eating this, but I didn't have a choice, And as children, we're dependent on our caregivers, and we have to survive. We have to assimilate basically in order to survive. And at some point, that's what I did, and really turned against so much of what felt really natural to me. And then it took a long time to move through that. So I got to New York because of reading the Babysitter's Club books. There was a character, her name was Stacy, and she lived in New York, and she would shop at Bloomingdale's, and I thought she was the coolest in the entire world. And I was like, oh my God, I want to be like Stacy. And that's how I got that seed of desire, and watching the Thanksgiving Day parade, and just seeing New York City. It always just had this magical appeal to me. And I remember when the first time I went, I was like, this is better than I ever dreamed. Yeah, so.
And then once you lived there, did that wear off, or did you still have this kind of magical view?
Definitely still loved it, yeah. I mean, to this day, it's the greatest city in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened after the going to Bergdorf Goodman?
So I was working at Bergdorf. I ended up getting married when I was living in New York to somebody that was from Texas, and he was also living in New York. And so we left New York for Texas so that he could go to law school.
And what did you see? What attracted you to that guy?
I would say what had probably attracted me to him, I don't really talk about him very much. So probably don't want to comment on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But long story short, got married.
Yeah.
He got his law degree.
Yes.
He starts practicing, and that goes badly. Is that safe to say?
It was a challenged relationship. Yeah.
From the get-go.
From the get-go.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But I had the religious conditioning of, having sex with one person, being married to one person for life. Divorce is not an option. So regardless of what happened with him, that was just very much a part of that conditioning that I had, those the primal part of my brain. This was like ingrained in from childhood, and I stuck with it for a really long time.
I don't understand how you maintain a relationship with your parents, even though, like, that bond of love was stronger than what is such a deep faith, you know, that they had to sort of get over the faith, and you had to get over your different faith in order to have a family relationship.
Yes.
How did you do that? I don't know.
You know, I mean, and that continues to this day.
So when you move from leaving your parents behind to leaving this marriage behind, what happened when you escaped that marriage to Sarrah? What happened to Sarrah?
So what happened to me actually started prior to that. So I would say a big part of my transformation started when my son was born, and that was when I really started to just notice the effects of my life, and you know, being in charge of another human being is a huge responsibility. And so, you know, I started looking at things like my diet was one of the first things. I mean, and it wasn't something that I'd really taken seriously before. Like, I was just rail thin and I didn't have to think about it. And but then I started thinking about the things that I put into my body, and eventually became a vegetarian, and started growing a garden with him, and you know, like living a more holistic life. But even prior to that, when I was in school at FIT, I had been practicing yoga, and I had continued that, and it became more of like a lifestyle rather than just a workout. And so I just continued down the yogic path. And then when my daughter was born, that was hugely pivotal, because when I was pregnant with her, I had so much in me that was really conflicted. And I still had the primal brain conditioning from childhood of all the religious programming, but then I had, like, in my cortex, I was like, I don't agree with this isn't who I am. And I couldn't bridge the two. Like, I was really struggling. And it came up a lot when I was pregnant with her. I had a home birth with her because when my son was born, there were just a lot of things that happened at the hospital that I didn't want my daughter to have to go through. And so I decided I was going to have a home birth. The placenta didn't deliver, and I ended up hemorrhaging. And so by the time I got to the hospital, I had no pulse. I was completely gone. They gave me 3 blood transfusions. I almost needed a 4th. So basically I had died. And then they brought me back. I came out of that, and my experience was just that there is nothingness after this. And there was just nothing. And so that helped me finally move past like the hang-ups that I had around heaven and hell and all of that, and begin to really move forward with my life. And it was right after that. She was probably about 6 months old when I started practicing Kundalini yoga, which is a more spiritual form of yoga. Like, it really incorporates a lot of accelerated practices that people do to advance in their spiritual yogic development. And so I started doing that, and I finally got strength to find myself and start to really, like, retrain my thoughts and all the stuff that had been holding me back. And so that was huge. I ended up going to India the first time.
How old were you?
When my daughter was born?
No, how old were you when you went to India?
Let's see, I was, I think 30, about 30. I don't remember exactly.
That's pretty unusual.
Yeah.
A lot of people are into yoga. Not that many go to India to follow it.
Yeah, I mean, it was strong, like, and I had Gurmukh Karkalsa was my teacher, and she's amazing. She's just such a fierce, feminine female teacher, and like I learned so much, and she was a huge inspiration for how I teach now. And so I was really honored to get to go study with her. And so I did that, and then I went back again and did another training the following year. It was like, I think it was after the second time I went that my ex-husband and I ended up officially separating for good. And I was just, because in the past I had always been like, no, we can work it out. And that time I was like, all right, you're done, I'm done. Like, let's move on. And so we did. And it
seems a kind of acceptance or a letting go.
Yeah.
I mean, as you say that, you open your hands and like let go.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I sense like this evolution in you during all this growth and shifting of becoming your own person. Am I reading too much into that, or?
No, that was definitely like the beginning of it, and it's amazing. I feel like every single day I get to a point of like a feeling like I've come so far, and then like the next day I'm like I've come so even further than yesterday. It's like I really feel even now is just the beginning, and I've been on this journey a long time.
What's the difference between, let's say, how your brother was raised, or even your ex-husband, and the way your son, like, what do you give to your son as the result of all this study about a very strong female ethic or influence?
Yeah, I think it really is a part of the conversation that I have with both of my children. As a profession, I'm a men's sex coach, and I work with men every day around their sexuality.
I have no idea what that means.
Yes, so, and it's going to mean something different based on, who is working as a sex coach. But for me, I work with most of the men I work with is in the aspect of personal development around their sexuality. And so it really is looking into the shadow of the parts of them that most of the time they haven't even looked at before, and why they're showing up in their sex life and in their relationship the way that they are.
And so as a way of talking about men developing as fully formed human beings, talking to them about sex and sexuality is a way of it's a way into the whole person. Am I reading too much into that, or?
So, I mean, our sexuality is core of who we are. It's what we come from. And if we're denying that, if we don't understand that part of us, then it impacts the rest of our lives. And so many men and women, I do work with women as well, but the bulk of my practice is with men. And there's just so much that we deal with. Most sex education comes from either, abstinence training, some sort of minor sex ed in like a 5th grade class, in a public school, or from pornography. And all of those are very bad examples of real life sexuality. And so Tantra is the form of sexuality that I teach when it comes to an actual practice, but we do a lot of the therapeutic work around that as well.
And I just want to raise my hand and say, can you say more about what this tantric thing is?
So Tantra does come from India. That's what I trained in. I trained in white Tantra when I was there. So white Tantra uses your energy and the energy in your body, but not necessarily in a sexual way. When I teach Tantra, I'm basically focusing on 4 principles of breath, sound, focus, and movement. And it's how we put those 4 things together that create different sensations in the body. And when you breathe a certain way, you're going to have certain reactions in your body. When you focus on different parts of your body, you're going to have a different reaction. Like, just notice your foot right now. If you put all your attention on your foot, you start to have sensations in your foot that maybe weren't there a moment ago, and because you're noticing them. And so when you apply these to sex, it makes sex so much better. It brings you into the present moment. It helps, men tend to have a lot of performance anxiety. Most of the guys that I work with are struggling with some sort of performance anxiety. And so the breath practices, the focus that they learn, all these things help get them out of their head, so that way they're in their body, in the present moment, just able to enjoy and just show up and be present with a woman that they're having sex with. I say woman because I work with heterosexual men. So.
Do you have any gay men?
No, some of them may be bisexual, but I don't. No, I work with.
Do you work with groups or individuals?
I have done private coaching, but primarily I do group coaching.
So how many men would be in the group?
So it's all online, and yeah, it's not in person. And right now, my men's group program has about 50 guys in it. My women's program has 17, so the men have more.
There's a great deal of trust that has to go into this, because I don't want to sit with a group of 50 guys that I don't know and talk about my insecurities.
Yeah.
So how do you get beyond that?
So all the guys that are in the program, they do sign non-disclosures for being in the program. So, we do our best to mitigate that. But there also is just a certain amount of growth that is expected when you're in a program like this. And part of emotional maturity is being able to talk about sex. And so the men, yes, a lot of them, not all of them, some of them come in and they're just like right off the bat, like able to participate. Others, it takes some warming up and getting used to it, because it definitely is something that is not part of the culture for men to talk. But our focus is not on our problems. Our focus is on our desires and where we are headed. And so when the men are communicating, it's more around what they're celebrating, the wins in their life, how they just implemented something from the program and they kicked ass, and they're the woman they're with is so happy about it. And so that is more of our focus, is where we're headed. We don't want to stay in the past. We want to move forward.
In terms of an educator or a coach, where are you today on monogamy?
I think that monogamy is an individual decision for every person and every couple to make. I mean, monogamy is also always changing. What used to be monogamous, being one person for life, is now changed to one person at a time, right? So the whole idea of monogamy has shifted as our sexual awareness has as a culture. And I think that for some people it works, and for other people it doesn't. In the book Sapiens, the author talks about the different cultures, the different tribal cultures, and his understanding of it is that some cultures were more monogamous and others were not. And so we all have, different traits in us that have been passed down from these original cultures. And so for some of us, it might feel more natural to be more monogamous. For some of us, it might feel more natural to not be. And I think just the more awareness and acceptance we have of everybody making their own choices for it is best.
The culture that I came out of was similar in certain ways. My parents were fundamentalists, they were evangelical, they weren't ministers, but my dad taught church school. And I don't presume to understand all that, but my experience was a terribly repressed culture. It's almost like if it feels good, it's wrong. And so, in my experience, it was a lot of self-loathing.
Yes.
Why do I have these desires? I'm bad, I'm sinful, I'm going to hell, that kind of thing. And so there's this tendency to swing wildly to the other side. And you talk about the pornification of the culture, right? As opposed to, this is a natural God-given thing. It can even be part of a spiritual communion.
Right.
It can be terribly uplifting and healthy and everything else. Like, nobody ever told me masturbation was healthy. You know, it was just wicked. You are familiar with like these extremes.
Yeah.
How do you negotiate? How do you help men negotiate that?
Yeah, so we work through all of that. And when I'm working with people, I'm working with a 3-part brain model. So it's getting the cortex, the limbic system, and the primal brain in alignment. Because if they're not, then you just continually self-sabotage.
That's been called the gray brain, the yellow brain, and then the body, the brain that's in the body, right?
So the primal brain being the reptilian brain,
yes.
The brain stem, yeah. And that is, we store all of these emotions, all of these experiences, we store all of this. Peter Levine, he developed a technique called somatic experiencing, based off of people that had PTSD for being in the military. And I use his techniques when working with clients because we store this as trauma in our bodies. And it's literally when we're turned against our sexuality, we turn against ourselves, we turn against our own bodies, our own nature, and our body registers that as trauma. And when people go through this experience with me, this training, so much grief tends to come up because they start to realize how many years of their life that they weren't enjoying their pleasure. They were exactly like you were describing, the self-loathing that they had. And so it's really a huge self-love experience. Like, that's a big part of it, really grounding in self-love, in self-healing, and then like coming into this awakening of like how amazing and beautiful and rich our sexuality can be, and how we've just been given this load of shit. Like, for men, I call it a crotch sneeze. Like, this is all they get for an orgasm, is like this crotch sneeze, instead of having like incredible full body orgasms that can literally last for hours.
Well, I was listening to another podcast, as a matter of fact, in which they started saying the notion that only women can have multiple orgasms is false.
Right.
And I had never heard that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm well beyond middle age when I heard that.
Yeah.
And that's just like.
And that is something that I train men in. Not only, so basically they learn how to have orgasms without ejaculating. So typically, it's the ejaculation that ends sex. A man at that point, he's no longer erect, sex is done. But orgasm and ejaculation are two separate acts. And so men evolved for them to happen almost simultaneously as a incentive to ejaculate, because orgasm is what feels so good. But they can actually orgasm and not ejaculate, so that way they can continue having more and more orgasms over and over. And then if at some point they choose to ejaculate, they can, or they can choose not to.
Yeah. How long have you been coaching?
So 2013 is when I first started my training, when I went to India, and I started teaching after that. But I got my additional training as a coach. I continued on after that, and went on to become a sex, love, and relationship coach through the Tantra Institute of Integrated Sexuality. And so that was additional training. And then I also work, I do continuing ed with Esther Perel. She's I
know who she is.
Okay, yeah. She's amazing. I've learned so much from her as well. So I just keep training.
Yeah. Why go to a sex coach as opposed to just a straight up therapist, sex therapist?
Yeah, so I mean, therapists work in a different way. So a lot of the times therapy, it depends on the therapist, but a lot of therapists are working more in the field of talk therapy, and it is really just, cortex driven. So you're not really working with the other parts of the brain, which my experience has been there's quicker and more lasting transformation that tends to happen when you're really working with the body and all of that combined and working from a holistic perspective. And also, there's a lot of people, men in particular, that don't want to go sit in a therapist's office. Like, they would rather be in an environment like this where we're having fun, where, it's like-minded people, it's more progressive.
But what you're also saying, I think, is you can't just say, give me a little blue pill, there, you're fixed.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can. And, I definitely don't ever discourage, men from doing anything that their doctor has suggested to them. Happy to work alongside, any other recommendations their doctor has given. Most of the men that come to me, they don't want to, or they've tried it and it didn't work for them. They find who they are, they find their own inner strength, their own inner confidence, and then they make empowered choices for their lives one way or the other. So many men, they find their value, they find their worth in how much money they're making, how they're being perceived at work, and I think that's part of the culture that I hope to be able to change, that men don't find their value in just that. And because it's really devastating for so many men when things, shift and they lose their job, or, just something bad happens at work. And there's so much more to a man than that. And then the other part of it is that stress, it is the #1 killer of our sex drive. And so if you're in a situation like that, it's clearly creating stress because, you're worried about loss of income, which is creating this, the fight, flight, or freeze instinct kicks in at that point because you're worried about survival. And so survival is prioritized over procreation. And if you're in the survival mode, then your sex drive is going to shut down. So the first thing to do is to do practices, which I am able to help with. A lot of the breath practices that we do really help with stress and just defeating cortisol, like really limiting the impact of cortisol. I think we really do need to move beyond men just being valued by their jobs and their net worth.
Okay. You could have done a lot of things. You could be doing a lot with the teachings you received from India. Why work in this area? Why do you feel this calling to help men?
So a little bit of a long story, but so
I got time.
After I went to India the second time, when I was in India the second time was when I was introduced to who would become my tantric guru. And that was in the path of Tantra Kriya Yoga. And that was another huge accelerator for me. That was when I was using all these tantric practices that I had learned, but incorporating my sexual energy with it. And our sexual energy is so incredibly powerful. And when I did that, and I started feeling alive in my body, all of the sexual repression that I had finally started to lose its grip on me. And I started just to feel alive for the first time since being a little girl living on the farm. I was feeling that type of excitement in my body. And so I met a guy. I was living in Austin at the time, and he was also in that same lineage of Tantra, and we were attracted together to each other. We ended up being together for about 2 years and just had incredible sex, just absolutely incredible. And it was during that time that I started teaching locally and just kind of was doing free events here and there, but really started building a community around what I was doing. Our relationship ended, and I was like out there having regular conventional sex again. I was just like, this is horrible. Like, I don't ever want to go back. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, once you've tasted the good stuff, it's like, you don't want to do it. And so at that point, I was teaching out of my house. I did a co-ed class with a co-teacher, and was teaching.
A man?
A man, but he and I were not
partners.
We were not sexually together.
Right.
We were just teaching together. And so we were teaching, and then I went on to start teaching women on my own. I had my coaching certification at this point, and so I was teaching women, and they were just having these incredible breakthroughs. You know, we're in this period of women's empowerment, of Me Too, and all this stuff. And I was teaching prior to Me Too, and it was actually interesting to watch the progression of women as we were pre-Me Too, in Me Too, post-Me Too. I was teaching them, and then they were like all awakened and liberated, and they're just like, okay, Sarah, but now who am I supposed to have sex with? Like, where are the men that I can have this type of incredible sex with? And they literally were begging me, please, please teach the men, please help the men. And so I went back and got additional certification to specialize in men's sexuality at that point. And I said, all right, I'm gonna do it. And I just looked around at what's going on in the world, and as an empowered woman, I want empowered men by my side. I'm bisexual. Like, I'm happy to be with women. I love women. They're amazing. I have incredible sex with women, but I also really love men. And I just found that even in my own personal life, it was so much easier to find really strong, empowered, secure women than it was men. And I felt like this just isn't right, I think that insecure people bring people down, and there are a lot of feminists out there that are very insecure, and they're trying to bring men down in order.
Insecure in their...
They're just insecure people that feel like they need to bring men down in order to rise up themselves. Whereas I feel like secure, empowered people instead say, let's all rise together. And yes, there are plenty of men that have done really horrible things, but there are plenty of women that have also. And
Well, just in terms of violence, though, men tend to do a lot more violence.
They do. But, I think that there's two sides to every story. And I want to empower people. I mean, I've got my own stuff that I've had to deal with in relationship to the masculine, but it is seeing us all as individuals, that we're all people. I mean, I work with incredible men every single day that are just amazing. Like, they have such beautiful hearts, and they care so much, and they want to be incredible husbands and lovers and boyfriends, and so I think where we put our attention is what we're gonna see. If we're looking for all men to be horrible, then we're gonna see that all men are horrible. There are depictions of it everywhere. It's easy to see it.
What do you tell your son and daughter about sex and sexuality because they're teens? They're becoming teens?
Yeah, my son is 13, my daughter's 9.
Okay. So your daughter's not quite there yet. And my heart just goes out, my son's 23 now, but my heart just goes out to these kids, because in a pornified culture, it's just like, it's just a complete, like, unreal. It might as well be unicorns. It's just a complete unreal world.
Right.
It's just a completely unreal set of... And so how do you help, particularly a boy, negotiate that world? How do you give him tools that his peers are not necessarily going to have?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to my son about not necessarily sex, but body parts and things like that since he was really little, you know, like he knew a penis was a penis. It wasn't, you know, some like fake word for it. And just as he's gotten older, we've, you know, just continued the conversation to include different things. You know, when he first, you know, started going through puberty, like he was able to talk with me about his experiences, and he came to me asking questions because he knew that I'd be open and just, you know, give him real answers. In regards to porn, I mean, we talk about that as well. It's so accessible. He has a computer and an iPhone and an iPad, right? Like he can just click on and you can get porn any time of the day. And so you know, he knows that if he watches porn, that it's going to impact him sexually. And you know, we just have real conversations about it. It's not porn is bad, porn is dangerous, porn is dirty, right? It's not that, but it's what are the real life implications of this? Like who do you want to be when you're a man at some point? Because he tells me he wants to have a wife, you know, and so it's how is this going to impact you when you have a wife? And those kinds of conversations that are more real rather than just like hitting him over the head, like don't do this, because what kid is going to agree with that?
If you and I get struck by lightning right now, and this tape is the only thing that survives, right now, what would you say your legacy is? What, like, if you were being remembered, what do you hope the message that you imparted was?
First of all, I hope that my children would have a good memory of me. They are more important than anything, and that they would always remember their mama as being amazing. For my work, that I help empower people. Ultimately, that is my goal. Like, our sexuality is a part of us that has been just shredded over, you know, the last 10,000 years, and it's really, I hope my legacy is to help people heal that.
I honor the work you do. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Sarrah Rose didn't stay in her native Arizona for very long. She talked it over with the kids, and they've decided to move back to New York City. And that's where I reached her later on. So all the best to you, Sarrah Rose, and thank you for your time. I moved on that day to Yuma, Arizona, where I went on my tour of the West. We'll have more of those conversations, including one with my friend Robin from Santa Monica, coming up in the weeks to come. Thanks for listening.
ManListening is a production of Unmediated LLC in cooperation with the Queen City Podcast Network and Balto Creative Media. Allison Andrews at Andrews Creative and Rachel Clapp-Miller are developmental producers. Sally Higgins at Higgins & Owens tries to keep us legal. Our music is A Day at the Park by the group Pictures of the Floating World. Your announcer is Catherine Smith. That's me. Please go to our Patreon page. You'll find us at patreon.com. Look for ManListening, one word, no spaces. We hope you'll join us by becoming a member. A small investment can raise up the conversation. If you want exclusive member merch like a t-shirt, we can arrange that too.
A huge thank you and a shout out to all those who have supported ManListening from the very beginning. I'll never forget you. Thanks so much.
Don't forget to support us at Patreon. We believe one voice can change the conversation. Click the subscribe button, and next week you'll hear...
I'm a childhood victim of sexual abuse. My child mind went to the place of, I'm not worthy of intervention. And so I endured it for years.
That's next week on ManListening. Thanks.